Hey guys, I am Caitlin Dunn. I am a sixth grade social studies teacher, and today I will be doing a lesson that is working with the literacy topic of vocabulary. Vocabulary is one of the easiest things for me to tie into my curriculum because everything that we do is somehow going to be related to content vocabulary. So specifically today, I did my research from Hellman, chapter 3, 10, and then also from Proctor, chapter 5. And some of the things that I really focused on when I was reading and doing research on this was the increasing demands for language as students get older. And specifically in my class in social studies, students have to learn content vocabulary. So for all students, a lot of the vocabulary we discuss in social studies is new, but definitely for the ESOL students, they tend to really struggle with the vocabulary, especially when we get into big words. Like in this particular unit, I'm talking about reunification. So it's a difficult topic to talk about for students who have no background in English. So some of the other practices I looked at was that students need to be practicing their language more, so they need to spend more time speaking with their peers, more time maybe collaborating with peers to come up with ways to use their language better and ways to relate to each other that way. So specifically, I looked in chapter 3 of Hellman at the bricks versus mortar. So bricks was that basic vocabulary, and then the mortar was kind of what they used to piece it all together. So I'm kind of using that concept today. Their basic vocabulary word that they're going to look at is reunification. They're also doing a review on communism and democracy in this lesson. So you'll see how those are kind of included as well. And then the mortar, how it's all organized, how it's tied together. So we'll look at that specifically in Germany, which relates more to my standards. And then chapter 10 of Hellman really focused again on the importance of students talking, having students say a word and repeat it back. So we'll use that for the students to actually see the word or break the word down, and then use action, gestures, pictures. We're going to do a creation in this lesson as well. They're actually going to create the Berlin Wall. So just some ways for students to be able to connect a little bit more and understand a little bit more about the topic that's maybe a little more visual for some of the ESOL and struggling learners. So this lesson plan specifically is targeting bilinguals. It is actually going to be a lesson that's a remediation lesson. So my students have already learned the very basics of reunification and also the Berlin Wall, Cold War. We're talking about all of the units right now that are related to European history. So we are going to remediate after we've done an assessment in a couple of weeks. We're going to remediate any students who are lower level learners. So one of the other social studies teachers that I work very closely with is going to take all of our higher level learners, all the students who do really well on the assessment. He will take them and do an extension activity. I will take from both classes all of our lower level learners, which will include my ESOL students, as well as his special ed students, to be able to implement this lesson. Unfortunately, I do not have a class that is made up of only ESOL students. So I have to do something that's inclusive of all my students, but I am going to break this up so that I can specifically differentiate and look for those lower learners or lower level learners so that I can help them out and maybe give them a little bit more scaffolding from what they got when they were first taught this unit. So with all that being said, I'm going to go ahead and jump into my lesson. The way I've set this up is I kind of put everything on the PowerPoint. I do have examples of all the worksheets, and in my lesson plan, you can find the actual documents students will use, but I have also pasted copies of those into the PowerPoint just to be able to show you and make it a little bit easier so I'm not having to switch back and forth. I'll actually try to do everything right on the PowerPoint as well. Normally in class, I would do this using the PowerPoint through the projector, and then I would also write on the board. I tend to use the board a lot more than using my computer to write on the PowerPoint like I'll do today, just as an example. But I will, when I'm working with my students, I will do this a little bit more like through the board and obviously interact with my students a little bit more and things like that. So here is my lesson. So students, today in class, we are going to be talking about reunification and specifically the reunification of Germany. Who can help me define reunification? I want to look at each of these parts. Who can tell me what is the word, what is the prefix re means? So we'll now look at re. I'll give my students a chance to talk about it. Some of them probably know from language arts and from what they've been doing in their ESOL language arts class that re means again. So that is right. We're going to look at re meaning again. Now there's a word that we're going to break apart in two, but then we'll be able to put it back together. Uni is a word that means one. And many of you might have heard of the word unify. Unify means to bring something back together. So if you unify with someone, you're coming together, bringing together. So uni means one, unify is going to be bringing together. So far we're going to bring something together once again, make something one or make something whole. Then the last thing that I want to look at is tion. And anytime you see this, you're going to notice that that is going to be a noun or an action word. So this is something that we're actually doing. So if we are reunifying, we're bringing something together, we are going to look at it being a noun, and we're going to do this as well. It's going to be some type of action. We're going to bring it together again. At this point with my students, I would have them repeat after me. So I would just ask students to repeat the word reunification after me. I would also have them repeat the definition, and anything that I hear wrong or mispronounced in this section, I would have them repeat. So we would talk about reunification, and it means bringing together, becoming one. We could give some examples. Like a lot of students know the term reunion from different, family reunions or times that they've met together with other people. They've reunited together. If someone's gone away for a long time, maybe they reunited with them, or they didn't see someone for a long time. So we'll talk about all of those root words, kind of bring up anything. And this is really also kind of a student-led discussion. So anything that they bring up, obviously I would kind of use what they said as well. So at this point of the lesson, I just want to make sure that everybody knows reunification means bringing together or becoming one again. And I want to make sure that all my students can pronounce reunification. Students, can you tell me what country is identified on this map? We've seen this map of Europe many times in class. My students will definitely know that this is Germany. They should be able to point that out pretty quickly. So in Germany after World War II, moving into the Cold War, was divided into Western and Eastern sides. So the Western sides were made up of the Allied powers. If you look here at this map, you can see here the northern section of Germany is made up of Great Britain. Over here, all the way to the west, along the coast, this is made up of France. And then in the southeastern portion, you have the United States. So when we talk about Germany and the division of Germany, we're going to talk about the fact that on the western side, all of the Allied powers make this up. And we want to talk also about what the Allied powers support. typically they're going to support things like freedom. You see, all of these countries have some common types of government like democracy. So that's something you would see throughout the western side of Germany. On the eastern side of Germany, you'll notice that it is red. And we've talked before about the reds being communists. The reds are going to be supporting the Soviet Union. Now, what's interesting about the eastern side of Germany is right in the middle of the eastern side, you'll notice the capital city of Germany is Berlin. And Berlin, along with the rest of Germany, after World War II, was also divided up. This is a picture of Berlin here. This is the city showing you a little bit closer view. And again, on the western side, you have the Allied countries. On the eastern side, you have the Soviet Union. So again, we're looking at freedoms on the side, and you're looking at more strict government on the eastern side. And this should all be familiar topics to my students. We've talked about it many times. Depending on how my students reacted to this part of the conversation and how willing they are to be involved, how much they're showing their depth of knowledge, I could also go into talking about any reminders about the West. We talked about the Western Hemisphere, the Western side of the world, looking at the United States. Looking at Western Europe, they're going to be closer to these countries like the United Kingdom or Great Britain, also France. So that's kind of their way to remember. And then on the eastern side of Europe, they have Russia. So if students were still confused on this, I would actually go back to the map that I had on the previous page of Russia or of Europe, show them Russia, show them where the Allied nations would be. But most of my students at this point have a pretty good concept of geography because we've already done that unit for about 3 weeks prior to now. So moving on to the next page. At this point, students are going to begin to work in groups. So on the right side of the screen, I have a map, and this is the same map that I've printed out for all my students. So they will be given this map in their groups. And then I would give directions to my students somewhat like this. After passing out the papers, obviously students, you have maps on your desk. What I want you to do is work in groups of 3 to 4. So with your table groups, you are going to color and label the Soviet Union, and then you're going to label the Allied powers. Now you're going to do this for both Germany and Berlin. So if you remember from what we looked at on the previous map, this is Berlin here. So I want you to, from your memories, talk about it together. Remind yourself which side was made up of the Soviet Union, which side had the Allied powers, which was the United States, France, and then also the United Kingdom. Then on the side that you think has democracy, I want you to write democracy and explain anything that you know about democracy. So you can give examples, you can draw pictures if there's something that it makes you think of. You can tell me anything that you know about what it means to be in a democracy. And you're going to put that on the side of your map that you think would have a democracy. So that should be either on the western side or on the eastern side. And then you are going to write communism on the side that you think would have communism. And you're going to list the examples and what that means. So students will be given probably anywhere between 5 and 10 minutes to complete this together. This part of the assignment is meant to really get students talking and working together. So even though I've kind of already previewed all this, obviously they've learned it in previous lessons, but I just kind of did a little review of it as well. I'm looking to see what they are able to recall and what they're able to talk about. If I was working with a higher level group, I maybe would not have given them so much information in the previous slide. But for my lower level learners, I really want to continue to introduce them to the topics and define the topics as much as possible. And then I want my students to be able to go back and repeat the information and get that practice, like Hellman was saying. They really need practice in saying the language and being kind of being immersed in that language through maybe listening to their peers and through participating themselves in speaking. So at the end of students, once they've kind of finished and have a good idea of what this looks like, I'm going to show them this map, and this should be similar to the way that their map is colored. And then I would lead them in a discussion, and I would have them participate at this point. This is going to be them telling me what their groups have put. So while their groups are working, I would walk around, maybe ask questions for things that aren't right, try to get them thinking. Maybe for groups that finish very quickly, try to get them into a deeper discussion on the topics. And just got to keep everyone actively participating and engaged. And then once everyone is finished, I would bring them to this slide. Obviously, I have it colored. And I would go ahead and ask them which side do they think represents communism. Hopefully, they would remember that on the eastern side over here, they have, this is the Soviet Union. So on my board, I would write USSR or Soviet Union. And then I would write that the Soviet Union has communism. And then we would discuss some of the characteristics of communism as well. And this is all stuff that we have started on. We're also going to be leading into this in the next unit as well. So they'll get a lot of information on this, but they can't really understand easily why it came back together if they don't understand what the division was about. So that's why I'm really trying to paint a picture, kind of paint that prior knowledge of why was the division created, and then go into the rest. So we've talked about Soviet Union, we've talked about communism. We talk a lot about how in communism, people have to share everything. So we would definitely put that up, share. We would also put up, they have limited freedoms. And then we would want to switch over and do the allied side as well. And same thing here, we want to talk about just kind of the characteristics of why this region is the way that it is. So on this side, and I apologize for my handwriting, it is very difficult to write on this screen. But this side, I would want to put that it is the Allies. And then we would just kind of talk about each of the countries that make that up. So we could say USA, United Kingdom, and then France. And then we would go on to talk about democracy. And then what it means to live in a democracy, freedoms. And then specifically voting. And this section is kind of going to work to do a couple of things like I mentioned. We're really hoping to help continue to just kind of pull all of these topics together to continue to reintroduce the standards, continue to go over some of these basics as well. But then I'm hoping it will also help to paint a bigger picture of reunification if students are really grasping these concepts. So after we have led that discussion, we are actually going to create the Berlin Wall. So my directions to students would go something like this. In groups, I would like you to make the Berlin Wall. So all of my students are going to have little blocks. These could be like math blocks or any kind of little cubes, Legos, anything like that. I'll give them to all my students. They also have this map of Berlin as another document that's on their desk for each group. So in your group, students, I would like for you to create the Berlin Wall. Notice that this gold line, if you see the key right here on our map, you can see that the gold line all around Western Berlin was made up of the wall. So our key here says that 96 miles was how long the Berlin Wall was, and it went all the way around Western Berlin. So what I want you to do is I want you to create the wall in your groups, And once you finish creating that wall, I want you to discuss the following questions. How do you think the citizens of both sides of the wall felt? Which side would you want to live on? If you had to live on one side of the wall, where would you want to live? And why do you think people would want Berlin to be reunified? Remember at the beginning of the lesson, we were talking about reunification. So that was bringing the country back together. It's separated right now by the wall. Why do you think the people would want to be reunified? Why do you think they would want their country to be reunified? So students would have about 5 to 10 minutes to work on this. It won't take them too long to build that wall with 3 or 4 of them doing it. And then hopefully they get some time to talk in their groups and get a good discussion about it. So after that, I will kind of go back over the questions with each of, for each of the students for the groups. And then I want to show this YouTube video that will also be an example and address when Ronald Reagan actually tells Gorbachev to tear down the wall. So this is going to serve as a visual, and hopefully it is popping up on your screen as well. I'll play it for you. So this will serve as a visual for them and also an audio so that they can see what actually happened in history.
If you see peace, if you see prosperity for the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe, if you see globalization from here to this gate, Mr. Gorbachev, open this gate. Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
So at this point, again, that's a very quick clip, but the point is just to get students to see what was happening in history and how the countries united, or how the countries were working together to try to get the Soviet Union to tear down the wall. And so then at that point, I would kind of lead into me telling students to tear down their walls. So the walls that they made of Germany, they would tear down, and we would talk about how it feels to reunify. For a lot of the discussion in this, it is that, families were separated, neighbors were separated. And so what does it feel like to be, together, and then you're taken apart and now put back together? So again, all of these conversations we're hoping to really continue to explain to students what it means to reunify. So at this point, the lesson would pretty much be over from my standpoint of teaching and students working together. I would want to do an assessment for students to work on their own, and so that I could know really what students' level of proficiency is at this point. So this is a show what you know activity. At the top, I have keywords and phrases. Students should fill in where it says West Germany, any of the phrases that go with West Germany. So the answer key for that would be Allied power, democracy, freedoms, right to vote. And then they could put any more that they came up with themselves. So anything else that they know about what happened in West Germany, maybe they want to put, the United States or France, United Kingdom, or part of that, something like that. They could add any of that. And then on the eastern side, I'm looking for them to include the Soviet Union, and then communism, that there's more government control and that resources are shared. And then lastly, students are going to define what reunification means. So in this activity, in this assessment, I will really be able to see specifically what students know. And then I've come up with this mastery rubric for individual assessment. So if you look on the right side on my standard mastery, so the full standard is for students to explain how German reunification contributed to the collapse of the Soviet Union and led to the end of the Cold War. We have not gone to all of that just in this lesson today, but students should be able to start putting some of the pieces together. They should definitely be able to, discuss the reunification piece of that and why that made the Soviet Union collapse, maybe some of the difficulties there, how the Cold War ended for that for my higher level students, definitely for my students who have a little bit more proficiency, those level 5s and above, they might be starting to hit some of those standards. For my beginner students, I'm really looking that they can label on the map the difference between East and West, that they can hopefully identify either the Soviet Union versus the Allied powers or communism versus democracy. So I just want to see some start to understanding of these concepts. Even them, putting some of the information on there will start to show me kind of that they're understanding a little bit more of the information by using that visual on that map. And then for reunification, students who are at a beginner level should be able to break down the reunify and then shun, which is that action or no. A novice level, which would be like access levels 3 or 4, would mean that students could then identify East and West on the maps. They could also identify which had the Soviet Union, which had the United States or the Allies, and then also communism and democracy. But they should also now be able to define communism and democracy. So that's the big change between the beginner and the novice level, is the definitions. And then for reunification, they should be able to define that. And they should also be able to identify that it is happening in Germany. So that should be something else that they know from this assignment. For the expert level, they're hitting all of these things. So they know the difference between the East and West. They're able to explain the impacts of the separation on Germany. So they're really more starting to hit those standards and our academic knowledge there. And then for reunification, again, they can define it, and they can also identify that this happened in Germany, and specifically that it happened during the collapse of the Soviet Union. So that is it. Those are just some additional maps that I had created. Let me see if I can get back to my lesson plan and just kind of hit anything concluding. So some reflection pieces. For me, I know some things that I have been struggling with is I have 35 kids in my class. I'm teaching them social studies. So not only am I trying to hit the literacy components, but I'm also trying to teach them a specific content other than just reading and writing. So I struggle a lot of times to differentiate in that class. There's 30 plus students. I have about 10 students in that class that are ESOL levels 1 or 2. So there's a lot. And then I also have a lot of behavior problems in my regular ed students, and just kind of a lot of dynamics in that class. So some of my questions that I would have, obviously for this assignment, my differentiation was breaking into 2 different classrooms and really focusing on the lower level learners and ESOL students. But just going forward in other assignments, if anyone has any other ways to differentiate or maybe ways to take this lesson and make it a higher level lesson, or I think there's even times that the lesson is a little bit more advanced and maybe something that is a little bit too difficult for my level 1 ESOL. So any ideas you have as far as differentiation would definitely be helpful. Or ideas, again, I am certified in language arts. I've never taught language arts. So if you have other ideas for how to break down reunification or ways to teach that or anything like that, that would definitely be appreciated. But, this is hopefully kind of a work in progress. I really enjoy doing this lesson and creating it and getting a little bit more targeted focus on one of my AKS standards. But any feedback you have would be greatly appreciated. So thank you for your time, and I appreciate you watching.